The year was 2003. Warner Brothers executive David Manning had just finished reviewing the dailies for Million Dollar Baby and called an emergency meeting. He demanded changes. The ending was too dark, the subject matter too depressing. The entire third act would alienate audiences. He gave Clint Eastwood an ultimatum: reshoot the final 30 minutes or face the studio pulling their marketing support. Clint listened to every word, nodded once, and said 5 words that would define his career: "We're not changing anything." What followed was a standoff that lasted 6 weeks, ended in Manning's humiliation, and resulted in one of the most successful films of the decade. The box office didn't just settle the argument, it destroyed one career and elevated another to legendary status. The screening room at Warner Brothers was filled with tension. 12 executives sat in leather chairs watching the final cut of Million Dollar Baby. The film had been shot quickly and efficiently, Clint's trademark approach, and was now being shown to the people who would decide its fate. The first hour played well. A female boxer fighting her way up, a grizzled trainer reluctantly taking her on, the relationship developing through training montages and sharp dialogue. But then the third act began, and the room grew increasingly uncomfortable. David Manning shifted in his seat as the story took its dark turn. He glanced at his colleagues, seeing his concerns reflected in their faces. By the time the credits rolled, the silence in the room was suffocating. "Well," Manning said finally, "that's certainly different." Clint sat at the back of the room, watching the executives rather than the screen. He had seen this reaction before: studio people confronting material that challenged their assumptions about what audiences wanted. "Different how?" Clint asked. "Different in ways that concern me." The meeting was scheduled for the following morning. 8 executives gathered in the conference room on the 16th floor. Clint arrived with his producer, a lawyer, and the quiet confidence of a man who had been through these battles many times before. David Manning led the discussion. "Clint, let me start by saying how much we admire your work, your efficiency, your professionalism, your ability to deliver quality products on time and under budget. These are rare in this industry. Thank you. But we have concerns about this particular film." "What concerns?" Manning pulled out a document, notes he had compiled after the screening. "The ending, the entire third act, actually. It's too dark. It's too depressing. Audiences expect a certain kind of experience from a sports movie, and this delivers something completely different. It has boxing. It has training montages. It has an underdog rising to the top. Those are sports movie elements. It also has a meditation on life, death, and mercy. Those aren't sports movie elements." Manning sighed. "That's exactly the problem." The discussion continued for 2 hours. Manning presented his case methodically: market research, audience expectations, comparable films that had failed with dark endings. He cited examples of movies that had been saved by late reshoots, productions that had turned potential disasters into successes through strategic changes. Clint listened without interrupting. When Manning finished, the room waited for a response. "I understand your concerns," Clint said, "but we're not changing anything. Clint, the ending is the point of the film. Without it, there is no film. You'd be asking me to remove the reason the story exists. We're asking you to give audiences what they expect. What they expect isn't always what they need." That's a lovely philosophy. It doesn't sell tickets. Sometimes it does. Manning leaned forward. "Let me be clear about the situation. If you refuse to make changes, we will significantly reduce our marketing commitment. The film will receive minimal promotional support. It will open in limited release and stay there." "I understand. You're willing to accept those consequences." "I'm willing to let the film speak for itself." "That's a gamble, Clint. I'd rather gamble on quality than on compromise." The next 6 weeks were a battle of wills. Manning's team began developing alternative marketing strategies, ways to promote the film without committing significant resources. They planned a limited release, a quiet opening, a quick transition to home video. Clint's team pushed back through every available channel. His lawyer examined the contract, looking for provisions that guaranteed marketing support. His producer reached out to allies within the studio, executives who had worked with Clint before and trusted his judgment. Meanwhile, the industry watched. Word spread through Hollywood. about the conflict between the veteran filmmaker and the rising executive. People took sides based on loyalty, history, and their own experiences with similar battles. He's going to lose, some predicted. The studio always wins when it's about money. He's never lost before. Others countered, Clint knows how to survive. The standoff continued. Neither side blinked. Clint's supporters began organizing. Within Warner Brothers, several senior executives quietly voiced their concerns about Manning's approach. They remembered previous films that Manning had doubted, films that had gone on to success. They worried about alienating one of the studio's most reliable filmmakers. Clint brings in projects on time and under budget, one veteran executive argued in a closed meeting. He's never had a financial disaster. His track record speaks for itself. His track record doesn't include films like this, Manning countered. This is different. Different doesn't mean worse. And my job is to manage risk. Your job is to make money. Sometimes that requires accepting risk. The internal debate intensified. Meanwhile, word reached the creative community, actors who had worked with Clint, directors who respected his approach, writers who appreciated his commitment to material. Support began flowing in, not publicly, but through channels that reached decision-makers. The pressure on Manning mounted. Clint took matters into his own hands. If the studio wouldn't promote the film, he would find other ways to generate attention. He arranged private screenings for critics he trusted, people who would judge the film on its merits rather than its commercial potential. He invited industry insiders whose opinions carried weight in awards discussions. He let the film speak for itself to audiences who could appreciate what it was trying to do. The response was immediate. Extraordinary, one critic wrote in a private note. One of the best films I've seen in years. Devastating and beautiful, another responded. This is what cinema can be. Award-caliber work from everyone involved. The positive reactions accumulated. Clint shared them with the studio, not as arguments, but as data. Evidence that his vision connected with people who cared about film as art, not just as commerce. Manning dismissed the early responses. Critics love dark material. General audiences are different. Or maybe you're underestimating general audiences. 3 weeks into the standoff, the studio proposed a compromise. We'll support a limited release, Manning offered. A few markets to test the response. If it performs, we expand. If it doesn't, we cut our losses. That's not a compromise. That's a death sentence. It's a reasonable approach to a risky film. It's designed to fail. Limited release means limited awareness. Limited awareness means limited box office. Limited box office justifies your doubts. That's a cynical interpretation. That's how Hollywood works. You know it as well as I do. Clint rejected the compromise. He wanted full support or nothing at all. He was willing to let the film fail on its merits, but not to let it be killed by half measures. The standoff continued. Manning escalated the conflict. He began talking to industry contacts, suggesting that Clint was becoming difficult, that age was affecting his judgment, that the studio was being patient with a filmmaker who had lost touch with contemporary audiences. The whispering campaign was subtle but effective. Reporters began asking questions. Was Clint's latest film troubled? Was there conflict between the filmmaker and the studio? What was happening behind the scenes? Clint responded by doing nothing. He didn't engage with the rumors. He didn't defend himself in the press. He simply continued working on post-production, preparing the film for whatever release it eventually received. His silence was unsettling. Manning expected confrontation. He expected Clint to fight back publicly, to make statements that could be characterized as difficult or unreasonable. Instead, there was only quiet professionalism, and the absence of drama made the drama itself less interesting to reporters. The standoff ended not through negotiation, but through intervention. Senior leadership at Warner Brothers, executives who outranked Manning, decided the conflict had gone on long enough. The potential costs of alienating Clint Eastwood were greater than the potential costs of supporting a film that might underperform. Manning was called into a meeting he didn't know was coming. We're giving the film full support, he was told. But the research is guidance, not gospel. We've decided to trust Clint's judgment. If the film fails, But it won't fail because we didn't try. Manning understood what was happening. He had overplayed his hand. He had turned a creative disagreement into a power struggle. And in power struggles with successful filmmakers, studios usually lost. "I'll prepare the marketing campaign," he said quietly. "You'll support the marketing campaign. Someone else will lead it." That was when Manning knew his position had changed permanently. Million Dollar Baby opened in limited release in December 2004. The initial response was everything Clint had predicted. Critics embraced the film. Audiences who saw it spread the word. The dark ending that Manning had feared became the subject of conversations, not complaints about being manipulated, but discussions about the film's themes, its courage, its willingness to go where safer movies wouldn't venture. The studio expanded the release. More theaters, more markets, more audiences discovering what the early viewers had found. A film that challenged expectations and delivered something memorable. The box office numbers began climbing. Opening weekend exceeded projections. Second weekend held stronger than comparable films. Third weekend, fourth weekend, the film continued performing as word of mouth spread. By January, Million Dollar Baby was a cultural phenomenon. Awards season confirmed what the box office had suggested. The film dominated nominations, Golden Globes, Screen Actors Guild, Critics' Choice, and ultimately the Academy Awards. Each nomination was another validation of Clint's judgment. Each award was another repudiation of Manning's concerns. The film won Best Picture, Best Director, Best Actress, Best Supporting Actor, four of the most prestigious awards in the industry, going to a film that one executive had tried to fundamentally change. Clint accepted his awards with characteristic modesty. He thanked the cast, the crew, the studio, specifically the executives who had ultimately supported his vision. He didn't mention the conflict. He didn't name Manning. He didn't gloat, but everyone in the industry knew the story. Everyone understood what the awards represented. A filmmaker had trusted his instincts against institutional pressure. The box office and the awards had settled the argument decisively. David Manning's career at Warner Brothers effectively ended within the year. Not through dramatic firing. That wasn't how these things worked. Through quiet marginalization, reduced authority, assignments that led nowhere. The gradual erosion of influence that happens when someone has been publicly proven wrong about something important. He left the studio in 2006, moving to a smaller company where his responsibilities were diminished and his opinions carried less weight. The industry remembered. When young executives considered challenging experienced filmmakers, they remembered David Manning. They remembered that confidence without humility could be career-ending. They remembered that box office had a way of settling arguments that couldn't be settled in conference rooms. Clint Eastwood, meanwhile, continued working. He made more films, he maintained his approach, efficient, professional, committed to his vision. He continued to succeed more often than he failed. And when he failed on his own terms. That was the legacy of the Million Dollar Baby conflict. Not just a successful film, a demonstration of what happens when vision meets doubt and refuses to blink. The story of Million Dollar Baby became a teaching case in Hollywood. Agents used it when advising clients about protecting their creative work. Producers cited it when arguing for final cut. Directors referenced it when facing studio pressure to compromise. But the lesson was more subtle than simply stand your ground. He had built support systematically, through early screenings, through industry relationships, through quiet pressure that accumulated without creating dramatic headlines. He had been strategic about being stubborn, and he had been right. That combination, strategic stubbornness plus being right, was what made the difference. Stubbornness alone would have gotten him removed from the project. Being right without standing firm would have resulted in a compromised film. Both elements were necessary, and both elements required something that couldn't be taught: the judgment to know when you were right, and the courage to act on that judgment. An executive doubted Clint Eastwood's vision. The box office settled it. The truth of that statement was simple but profound. Hollywood operated on confidence. Confidence in stars, in concepts, in predictions about what audiences would pay to see. Executives were hired to have confidence, to make predictions, to allocate resources based on their assessments. But confidence could become arrogance. Predictions could become assumptions, and assumptions could blind people to possibilities they hadn't considered. David Manning had assumed audiences wouldn't accept a dark ending. He had assumed sports movies needed uplifting conclusions. He had assumed he understood the market better than a filmmaker who had been working in that market for 40 years. He was wrong. The box office proved he was wrong. And once the box office spoke, there was nothing else to say. "How did you know you were right?" someone asked Clint years later. "I didn't know I was right. I believed I was right." That's different. Isn't that just stubbornness? Stubbornness is refusing to change when you should. Conviction is refusing to change when you shouldn't. The difference is whether your judgment is good. How do you know if your judgment is good? You test it over and over. Throughout your career, you make decisions and see how they turn out. If you're right more often than you're wrong, your judgment is probably good. If you're wrong more often than you're right, you should listen to other people. And when someone challenges your judgment, you listen to their concerns. You consider whether they might be right. And then, if you still believe in what you're doing, you stand firm. What if you're wrong? Then you lose. But at least you lose on your own terms. Losing while following someone else's vision is worse than losing while following your own. An executive doubted Clint Eastwood's vision. The box office settled it. And the settlement was definitive. Not because Clint was famous or powerful or connected, because he was right. Because the film was good. Because audiences, given the chance to see something challenging and beautiful, chose to embrace it rather than reject it. That was the answer to every doubt. That was the response to every concern. The box office settled it. And the settlement stood for all time.